We're going to get the guy that really knows how to make things shake, rattle, and roll, and that's Brian Bartosh. I met Brian, long time ago. So Brian has Top of Michigan Insurance Agency in Michigan, and he has been chair and president of AskNet, and I can't think of all your roles. But what he really is an innovator and an entrepreneur. He's figured out how to rebuild or how to build a sales force or a sales organization that actually works. And I thought we might be able to learn a few things from him. Brian has spoken before at Education Days, and he always gets rave reviews. So Brian, take it away. Let's give him a hand.
Good morning, everyone. If this all works right, we should see my slides. So Wendy asked me to look into the sales side of the brokerage agency in my agency, and it's something that we've been working on for quite a few years because we are all sales organizations, and we really can't make $1 of revenue without selling something. And sometimes that gets missed. And what I think and have observed over the last 30 years of technology, and the insurance industry is a very slow-paced industry as far as adopting technology. One thing I noticed in brokers and agencies around the U.S. and Canada is that we started to almost become techno-geeks in our business and forgot about the business of insurance, about building relationships, providing solutions to our clients, building those relationships that make a big difference, those experiences that clients are looking for. And that's really what Wendy was talking about a little bit here, is about the experiences. And I want to share with you just what happened a few months ago. I asked a group that I was speaking to if anybody had heard that Walmart was getting into the insurance business in the States. And then we have Google right behind them now. And everybody had heard that, and they said, are you concerned? And a lot of concern was there. Others would just say, sort of put the blinders on and say, I'm not worried, I provide the best service in my community, which just isn't enough sometimes, because we need, as brokers and agents, to be able to build our own brand. And I said, did you experience what Walmart offered? Because I went there and I found out that the companies that they offered coverage for and the pricing was exactly what I had. So what was different? What was different? And I think Wendy touched upon it. It's the experiences. The experience the consumer has is so much different. And when you look at the top 5 companies in that report of satisfaction, one of the advantages they had is it's a single company, and so they build a lot around that experience, and their experiences are different than what we're offering. And some of it is because we're disconnected. And when you talk about what Orbit's doing and what other organizations are doing about real time, and sometimes these acronyms and movements get diluted over time and sort of lose focus. So I'm glad that the Orbit group decided to say, hey, let's reboot. Because it's not about real time, the technology, it's about real time and experience. Your consumer is looking for answers quick. And what I gather with all this information, what I'm going to lead into about our organization is about working a lot smarter than what we've done in the past. We're not going to work harder. Who wants to work harder? Who wants to work faster? Yeah, who wants to work just smarter? Yeah, that's what we want to do. Just a little bit about myself. I don't want to elaborate too much, but I've been in business since 1979, so that means I'm seasoned. Okay. I'm a principal of the agency. We distribute through 9 branch locations and through the internet because we're expanding ourselves geographically. Because when we run out of prospects, we need to go further and further. And so we are on that bricks and mortar, our 9 branch locations. We've restructured the way we actually distribute through those locations because we did find that bricks and mortar is a key for the future. Because the consumer, even the younger generations, the reason why they do certain things and the reason why the internet has been attractive to them is the experience. But if we think about how can we have bricks and mortar for that local appeal, because last survey I looked at was just a few months ago also, had surveyed out the different generations about that bricks and mortar, about that local feeling, and consumers do like to deal locally in their communities. They do want to have that touch and feel. But they want all the technology that's behind Amazon or any of those others to do their business. Do you as a broker offer that today? Well, if you're not adopting real time and getting information to those people at the point of contact, you're not giving that experience. Not only that, but I can tell you that in your brokerage, when you take a service call, if you don't answer that call while they're on the phone, or while they're live chatting to you, or through that first email, you're doubling or tripling your costs of delivering that service. That's huge. That's huge, right? One of the things that we show in our process of servicing our staff is we make sure that every one of our client service reps and our producers see the revenue each account generates per year. And we tell them that that is the amount of revenue we get for the whole year to service these accounts. It's very important to know that, so that you don't oversell the account or overservice the account. Now, we don't hang up the phone after they reach their time limit and dollar amount. But we just realize at that point, we're on our own. We're providing service at no cost. And so that all becomes an aspect. I've been involved in technology since '85, strong proponent of workflow management. I mean, that is really the key to the success, is about counting the keystrokes. I love when I see things like this. Just because the keystrokes are what saves all the time. The more time we spend on a transaction, the more revenue we need to generate to pay for that infrastructure. I was recently in an agency that I'm doing some work for in Michigan, and they took me through, and it was a really impressive agency, staff-wise, how they had things set up. The building was fantastic. And I sat down and I said, well, what could be your problem? I mean, you've got a decent agency here. Can't afford it. Oh, that's a problem. Okay? Because there are inefficiencies there of running this organization are costing more than the revenue they can generate on those accounts. So what can they do? Well, they can increase the revenue per account, or they can reduce the staff, but neither one's going to really work in the equation. So they need to do is to make the staff smarter and working smarter. So utilizing technology has been success. And get the words there. It's not about using technology, it's utilizing technology. Because I can tell you that last figures that I've put together just from surveying crowds that I've spoken to is only about 20% of the agents and brokers in the room actually utilize their system to 80% or more of what it can offer. Those are shocking numbers. What's really interesting is when we start to go through the exercise, everybody initially thinks that they're using their system completely, and that the only way to get better is to replace their system. I want to tell you today, when the GPS didn't work in my car, I didn't go out and buy a new car. I opened up the manual and said, oh, you got to turn it on. You have to realize how it works. How many of you work with manufacturers? Anybody? Nobody wants to admit it? Okay. Imagine a manufacturer, the owner of a manufacturing company, always knows what their machines will do. It doesn't mean that they sit there and use those machines all the time. It just means that they know how much they'll produce. They know what it'll take if they're down. They know those types of things. And that's what I think is very important for principals or broker owners, is to make sure that you understand what do I have here? What can it do? Research that out and find out, because I'm going to need to apply that as I'm going through. So this brings us into our sales culture, because really, when we found that we had the technology working and the workflows are working smoothly, and we're on the service and we're doing pretty well, we are a sales organization. And sales organization means all the way through the organization. That means that your CSRs, your client service people, need to be able to ask if they want fries with that burger. Do they? Anybody? Because I find that, yes, they'll say yes, but when you sit down with them, they don't know what words to say. Unlike other industries that spend a lot of time on scripting and working with responses with their employees, we as an insurance industry spend very little time advising or assisting our staff on what to say or how to handle an objection. We just assume that they're just naturally going to be able to handle it because they have all this insurance experience. And that's not true. There's two areas that we focus in on our sales culture. First of all, take risk. The most successful people always take risk, right? Who do you know that's successful that didn't take a risk in their life? The entrepreneur takes huge risks. Usually because they're not smart enough to know that they're doing some dumb things. But that's how they keep doing it, and they're very successful at it. I know a lot of entrepreneurs are not very good business people, but they're great at coming up with ideas and getting us going and taking the risk. The risk is very important. And so we ask our sales staff every Monday morning is, what risk did you take last week? And at first there was always silence. And then we start to see them open up. And just by asking and challenging them with taking the risk, we'd see producers come in and play and say, at the meeting they'd say, you know what, I was in the car wash last week. I decided to take a risk. I get car washed all the time, never talk to this person about insurance. I decided to just go ahead and ask. I took that risk. And surprisingly, they responded and said, sure. So we want people to be able to take risks. Now we want to help make that risk a little bit less threatening to them. And so I'll get into what we lead into some of our workflows that we follow through the producers. And there's one thing about our sales process, is we let our producers customize their communication, but we don't let them change the workflows drastically. There's some consistency. And why would that be? Well, we go back to brand. And when I look at the top 5 in the survey, it's because they've all built a brand. What's a brand? It's not a logo, it's not a slogan, it's not an ad line, it's not anything but what people think of you when they see your agency name, your logo. What's your brand? What do they think of? Is it that 24/7 service? It isn't going to be good service, by the way. Because when you ask agents or brokers, what do you do in your community for insurance? And they say, we provide the best service. We hardly ever see anybody stand up and say, I give the worst service. They don't. We all provide the best service. But what's different about our brokerage to the one that's down the road? Have you identified your brand? The other one thing we wanted to do in our whole flow of our sales process, our sales culture, was understand business intelligence. And I talked about this a few years ago. At that time, it was just sort of like a cloud for most people. I thought, well, maybe I better go back and rethink this. What am I thinking about this business intelligence? And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that business intelligence is where we became successful. By business intelligence, it means that we took the data and we understood when our consumer was going to make their next purchase. What consumer was most likely to buy this product versus that product? Simple questions that our staff would ask, like when they're doing a personal auto, do you have a hitch on your vehicle? What would that mean? Well, if they do you pull a boat trailer? A snowmobile trailer? Camper? Because that's more opportunities, right? Can I quote those for you too? So there were certain questions. Of course, we had to train the staff to make sure they knew how to ask the questions and what questions to ask. But the more with that information we could gather, we put it in our VMS system so that we could track. We track everything from education levels to our ABC rating of prospects and our clients. And we wanted to make sure we understood all of the different factors that we could track about them to understand when their next purchase was going to be and what that might be. Something as simple as claims handling. We identified through our management system the calls that were coming in on claims and finding out what are the most common questions that come in during the claims process. And then we took those questions, we decided we're going to answer them before they asked them. And that reduced our claims handling expenses by about 30% in our agency. Because we started generating automatic communication about the expectations, because most people said, well, what can I expect? I've never had a claim. Okay, well, we'll tell everybody what the expectations are when the claim's first handled. Another thing they all want to do is I sort of want to be just checked with to make sure things are going okay, because a lot of people will brew with a problem and spread it all over social media before they'll call you and say, hey, I've got a problem. And so a couple weeks into the claims process, we would always interject with communication is, how are things going? And we found out that if something was going wrong, we were getting it ahead of time before it grew into something very complicated. And lastly, we found out that people just want to know that things were taken care of all right. They want to be able to respond in a survey. Gosh, I didn't think anybody would like to do surveys. We found that they do make them short and simple. We found out net promoters. Anybody hear about the net promoter scores? Okay, and that's our last question. Based off the claim experience you've had, would you recommend us to another friend or relative? And if we got a 9 or 10, then we knew the claims experience was good. And a lot of it improved as we communicated more with them. Because think about this, in your brokerage, you can take claims, everybody can take a claim. And if you only measure those that are closed successfully, you've missed the experience in between. The experience that sets your brand. And so we want to use all of this business intelligence to help build our opportunities. And we did that in the sales side too. So when we go for the win, we have our producers identify what is our strategy. How many producers go in and don't really know if they're going to win or how they're going to win? A lot do. You don't have to raise your hands for some of these questions because you don't want to point yourself out. But I'll try to answer them the other way so that it's a more positive question. But the reality is that when I asked our producers, what's your strategy? They said, I don't know. I get the information, we quote it out, give them the best price. Is that all they're buying is price? Because truly, are they really buying price? Do we know what price is? Or do we understand it as value? Because we find most consumers really do want a value. They don't want necessarily the best price. They want to make sure they get the right value. I always use this example when our washer and dryer, we had this washer and dryer set imported from somewhere, it looked good and paid a lot for it, never worked. And I told my wife, I said, Home Depot has a washer and dryer, $550 for the pair. We're going to get it. It's white only, 2 buttons, that's it. Don't want anything to break. And we went down there and we spent about an hour looking around, and we decided that we ended up coming home with a LG stainless steel, every option there is. To the point, I can't run the washer or the dryer. It's very complicated. I'm not a tech person, and so I have to stay away from that. My point is we saw a different value. We were presented with more facts, more information, to make a good decision that we wanted more value, which was about 4 times what I paid for, or was intending on paying for when I walked in. How many people walk into you and say, I want the best price? How many times do you let them walk out with the best price? You know, my son, who started in the industry about 6-7 years ago, I was always impressed with, he went to his minors in professional sales, so I was impressed with what he had learned in the science of the sale. Because there's a science to it. It's just not, we're not naturally born salespeople, there's a science to it. And on some of the accounts, when he'd walk in and said, you know, current pricing, $18,000, what'd you sell it at? 22. Did you give him a better price? I gave you better value. You know, understanding what value was. That was an important part. So here's our 4 items. This is the only way to win an insurance sale. Coverage, price, relationship, and service. And we actually had cards printed up, given to each one of our producers. When they come in on an account that we want to discuss, they need to bring their cards with them. And we lay them out on the table, and I say, what cards do you hold? Because the cards are going to decide. So if you hold certain cards, like if you hold the coverage card, because they had a claims issue before because they weren't covered, and now you hold a coverage card, you have a wedge. You have an opportunity to give them something they didn't have. And sure, their other broker could come through with that same solution, but they're a little late, right? Because you already had a claim situation. Or you left them unexposed or uncovered for an exposed risk. You could have the price. And when we say price, this is somebody that's truly driven by price. Doesn't even care what coverages they get. You know, I want a $125 a month payment. I don't care what it covers. Do you get many there to say that? Because I always tell them, you know what? I can match any price you want. All right? Here's your price. Here's your product now. Okay? So it doesn't have any coverage. That's okay. Relationship. Relationship is something that we might come in and actually hold the card originally. Like our producer that went in and knew the car wash but never asked about doing their coverage for them. That's a relationship. That's a relationship card. Or we could have the service card. And our brand is not going to be just good service, but what kind of aspects in your service do you have to offer? We tell our producers they carry around a toolbox, and they need to open up that toolbox and look through there and find out the services and things we can offer that make the difference. And so we as a brokerage, as an agency, we need to make sure we provide those services, like a client portal, live chat, 24/7 service. The different services we as a broker or agency can offer to support our producers in their sales process. We're not really worried about producers going to another brokerage or another agency because we're offering them tools that they don't have somewhere else. Just like you want to offer your clients something that they can't get somewhere else. You can start stacking these cards together. And so obviously if we lay out the cards in front of someone, and we find, well, you don't bring the cards with you to the appointment, by the way. They're sort of secret. You hold them in your pocket. But as you put your cards out and you start to say, gee, I have coverage and relationship, or relationship and service, think about the price card. How valuable is the price card? It's got the lowest value. Because I'll tell you what, if I walk in there and your brokerage has the coverage, the service, and the relationship, and they come in with the best price, they'll take the price and say, hey, what can you do? How close can you get? That's close enough. Because I have all these other cards with you which are much more valuable than the price card. So in our sales process, we needed to make sure that when we go for the win, we need to know what's our strategy. Because one of the factors I'll talk about a little bit more, I'm not going to look over at Devona because I don't want to see the time. But the one thing that we always want to watch out or set in our goals is our walkaway rate. And what's a walkaway rate? Well, it's for every 10 diagnostic appointments, how many times will the broker or agency or producer walk away? They simply say, we're not a match. And we found that most people don't do it. Most people didn't do it because they didn't have permission. We're actually giving you permission. 20% of the people you step in and talk to, 2 out of 10, you can say, I'm sorry, we're not a fit for you. Maybe in the future, I'd like to keep in touch with you, but today I'm not going to be able to help you out. Most producers don't want to do that because any person with a live body, warm body, pulse, and ready to go, they're willing to talk to. You bring in an account and you find out the competition is really a leader in that market area. Should we spend all this time practice quoting? How many of you that do quoting like to practice? We don't want to do that. Our resources are limited. And so we want to make sure we use them the best way we can, and we found out that we could do a walkaway rate. What happened when we started putting that walkaway ratio, that walkaway rate, is that the close ratios moved from the 20 to 30% ranges to the 50 and 60% ranges. They more than doubled. We have one producer with a 72% close ratio as of the first quarter. So that means that every 10 accounts he goes into, 7 of them come back as sales. Isn't that much more effective use of your time? I'll tell you, a lot of it goes back into understanding this relationship right up front, setting the rules, the guidelines with your customer, your consumer, and then making sure that you identify those that you're not going to have a match for. And that's hard to do. And it takes a lot of structure and monitoring and coaching to get that to be done. I always look at it from a sales management side, is that you just can't hire producers, get them a license, and put them out there. It's a coaching spot. And you need to bring in the resources, bring in the other part of the team that can make that sale work. Coach them through the process, coach them through the ups and the downs, and make sure that happens. So one of the things we need to do is make sure we have clear, defined goals. This always brings up some interesting thoughts to me in my time in working with people with goals. I've always been somewhat goal-oriented. I have a 10-year goal. Not a lot of detail to it, but I have a 10-year goal. And then I have my 3 to 5 year goals with a lot more detail than my current year's goals, which support those long-term goals. So my son, when he was in 9th grade, moving into high school, he needed to pick some classes and that type of stuff where he was going to go. So I said, Nicholas, I'd like to put this paper on the table here, and I'd like you to list out your goals every day, from now until Friday. Just when you think of one, just put it down there. So Friday came along, and I looked at the paper, and I looked and saw nothing. I said, well, Nicholas, what do you want to do? What are your goals? He says, Dad, my goal is to get up in the morning. It's a good goal. I mean, everybody wants to do that. But I was thinking a little more aggressive for, your future. So I started working with staff in our office, and I found out, you know what? Even adults have difficulties understanding goals. I had a CSR work in our life and health and benefits area, and I sat down with the first annual review, and they said, let's look at your goals. What kind of goals do you have? And she said, quite honestly, Brian, I only plan until the end of the week. And that was it. There were no long-term goals. There were no monthly goals. There were just a weekly goal. Get up, do this, 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 and this, and then end the week. And that's challenging. So then we start to really look around and find out, a lot of people don't understand even how to set a goal. Sometimes they don't set one because they don't want to have failure. So if you don't set a goal, then you're not going to fail, right? There's nothing really to shoot for there. But we found out in our business, we needed to give them some data, some business intelligence back so they could figure out a decent goal as part of their sales process. So we had to give them their close ratio. How many of you know what your close ratios are? Okay. How many know by producer? By CSR? Those numbers are small because that's the reality. Most people don't have a clue. They have a feeling. So feelings don't go far. You need to have the real data to understand what those close ratios are. And we found out that we can't overcomplicate our processes because we're always thinking about workflows and keystrokes and everything else. So how are we going to understand our close ratio? Well, we found out it was just one activity in our BMS, and we just monitored its success rate. So every time we provided a proposal of coverage to someone, we entered a proposal activity, and it was either closed successfully or not, right? Or it was over. And we ran that report that way, and it tells us up to the minute, by producer, by CSR, by company, by line of business, whatever way we'd like to see it, our close ratio of which ones are successful, which ones are unsuccessful, which ones are pending a decision. Isn't that great information? One activity. All we have to do is make sure everybody in our agency was using consistently. Consistency is really important in the whole factor here. But we need to get close ratios. We need to get retention ratios. How much new business do you need to write if you don't know what you're retaining? I've talked about this before, but it seems like over the years, we still only have a small percentage that actually understand the retention rate on an individual basis. They know it as a brokerage, but they don't necessarily know it as an individual basis. But when you're individually sitting down with somebody on their goals, we need to tell them what their attrition rate is. Because these are all factors that they can set up, because one of the things we give our producers the opportunity to do is pick their magic number. Anybody hear me say that before? Magic number? I'm trying to think of when we brought that on a few years ago. But magic number is your salary that you desire for the year. You name it. What other business can you walk in and say, this is what I want? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what you want, I'm going to provide you a work plan based off activity, not a production report, but activity to tell you what you need to do. And I'm going to look at your close ratio, your retention ratio, your average revenue per account, your average commission rate, difference between new and renewal. I'm going to look at all those factors, and I'm going to be able to take your magic number and transform that into activity. Because it's important that we track activity, not the production results. Okay? When you get a production report, and depending on how you track it, it could be 1 or 2 months late. How many of you, when you're watching a hockey game, wait till Monday morning to look at the score? Oh, come on. You don't. You want it in real time, right? And so then we look at our producer and we say, you know what, we're going to just run your production report, which is 2 months figures from 2 months ago, and tell you if you're doing good or bad, and then you're going to have to fix it. You really want to know at the period break, what do you need to do next to make this better, right? And so we start tracking activity, and every Monday morning we look at, and they can see their activity every day, but every Monday morning we look at all the activity the producers did last week, sales-oriented, not every activity they've done, but the ones that are sales-focused, and we look at all the activity they have coming due for the current week. And it's quite interesting, when our goal said that you needed to have 22 contacts per week, and maybe set up 5 appointments, and we see 0 scheduled for the coming week, we know we have a problem. We don't need to read about it in Monday morning's paper. We've got the answer right there. So our new producers, their time frame, first 90 days, even if they don't sell anything, we'll know whether they'll be successful or not, because we're going to track the activity. And so I suggest to you to take your sales process and focus around the activity you do to get there. Because a lot of times we don't give our CSRs or our producers enough time during the day to make the sale. Because there's certain activity you need to do. All our goals are then based on that activity. So when they set their magic number, we reverse that all back down to an activity goal. Now granted, sometimes we get a magic number and I'll have to come back and say, hey Bob, we need 130 appointments next week to make this goal. And so what's the problem? Maybe the magic number is a little too big, right? But I said, Bob, this is how we can come closer to getting that. We can come back and we can actually increase your close ratio. If we take your close ratio from 30 to 60% by getting more selective, we could get there. If we take your retention rate and add a couple points to it, we could get there. If we could take your average revenue per account and have you focus in on larger accounts that take a similar amount of time, we could get there. If we could work on those accounts that pay a higher commission, I've got one producer with a lot of workers' comp, and that's a very low commission rate. If we could focus that and direct it to more package business, we got more, we could get there. A lot of times we get a producer coming in and say, I'm not really doing well, I need a higher commission rate. That's not going to do it. And they always say, I'd like to negotiate. And there's one producer that comes in and says, I know, I never say a negotiate word to you. And I said, Dave, it's because negotiate means both of us come to the table and talk together. You don't bring a wish list that has no other solution. Negotiating is working back and forth. And negotiating works well because we have them negotiate their magic number, and I negotiate back with the amount of activity it takes. And doesn't that make sense? If you work, I'll give you this money. Seems like it's just a basics of business there. We want to make sure we use all the data that we have available so we make the best plan with our producers. They need a game plan for the whole year that they can work with. Now, a lot of us have been in business for a while, so back and say, Brian's not saying anything new. I'm not. The problem I have is that we're not going back and using this information we're talking about. I speak at for the National Alliance in the States on their agency management sessions, and I did a few in Michigan, and one person said, why are you sharing all this with us? Aren't you afraid we'll just take it and compete with you? And I said, no, here's the thing that doesn't bother me about that. I'll speak to all of you, and only one or two of you will actually go back and do something. That's disappointing, isn't it? That's reality. I hope some of you take some of this back and say, you know what? We do need to take another look at our sales process and put the science behind it. Because we're going to win. But not very many people actually go back out and do what they hear and see, talk about. You saw it in the numbers in your survey, how many people put those things in place. We need to provide sales results in real time. So as a producer makes a sale, it shows up on a dashboard graph every morning. And unfortunately, we show that as they lose an account. So there's two activities we look at, a sale and a lost business. Because that's their net growth. And so we want to make sure we track both, and they see it every morning. So they know instantly what's going on. So if you had a bad day, you can regroup the next day. If you had a bad week, you can regroup the next week. But what happens when you're seeing that information 2 months later? How do you regroup? I mean, sometimes you say, let's just forfeit the game. It's so far into it, I don't have time to make a change in direction there. So we don't want to make this the Monday morning news, as I mentioned. We want to make sure that we're giving this information back, which means we have to have a system in place to track that. And a lot of times we find that people are always looking for that golden egg software program that'll do the work for them. I just want to tell you, open your eyes a little bit and look at what you have, because in most cases, whatever system you have will most likely do somewhat of a pipeline management tool. And that's what it is. We're trying to manage the pipeline for those producers of getting information and tracking those results and be able to get that out there. And I'm going to touch on the very last slide here about where we actually tie in the business intelligence piece, which then makes our brokers even smarter to work with. And be careful I talk about those brokers, those producers. Here's 2 worksheets we use, and I mentioned to you, I'd be glad to share these off to you. These are one of them is a income reality test, and it's where they put their magic number. And we have them put whatever they want on there, whatever they feel they want to earn, because you know what? I have to understand their personal goals, and that's why we work, is for our personal goals, so I need to know what kind of revenue or what kind of income they need to meet their own personal goals. And I said, the sky's the limit. You name what you reasonably need to work with this year. So they put that on there. As we work our way down, we're really coming down to how many different contacts we need to make per day in order to get that work done. And so that becomes really easy. It's more of a mathematics. I need to make 10 contacts a day. And 1 or 2 of them need to be somewhat solid to get an appointment out of. And we give them their numbers. Their numbers are all individual. We find that they're very consistent between salespeople. They don't sway very far from 10 prospects to 3 appointments to 1 sale. And those numbers you've always heard for years and years and years. You think as times change, they would change, but they aren't. They're statistical numbers. So we work our way down there and understanding the number of prospects and the number of contacts, everything we need to get there. And on the right-hand side, we have to make sure people understand how many days a week they have to work. Because the reality is they don't necessarily have 5 sales days per week, right? And the bigger the person's existing book of business, which they're depending on for some residual income, the difference, that's going to change in the amount of days they have available. And so this is more of a goal worksheet that works ourselves through the production figures and comes off to what our goal is. And what the idea is, our bottom line here with the amount of time we have should match the top line with our income reality check. And then we know we have a solid goal. It's matched both ways in the amount of work that we want to have to do and the time that we have to do it. So now our producers get out there with a roadmap. They're ready to go, a battle plan. And that's why it's so important to go back to activity-based reports and get them the information on a weekly basis, because we can't let them fall off of this plan, because once they fall very far off the plan, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. So as an agency, we decided, it's important for us, because being the agency or the brokerage is to be able to provide the technology behind the process. And a lot of people say, our producers, they don't use the systems. Why not? Because we know in surveys that we've looked at over the last couple of years that a producer that uses a formal pipeline management tool earns 20% more income than one that does not. I got to give my guys a fighting chance, right? So I want to give them the opportunity to earn 20% more. And by guys, we mean gals and guys. University. So we took a look at the steps of the sale process. And again, I didn't invent these. These have been around forever. Whether you're selling Keebler crackers or IBM computers or whatever you're selling, you follow the same process. You need to introduce yourself to your prospect. You need to have some personal contact or phone follow-up to make that reestablish that connection. You warm them up. It might be 1, 2, 3 different contact points. How many minutes? 30?
10.
I can't see that far.
10.
Oh, okay, 10. Phone, so we need to manage that piece of it. We have our diagnostic appointment. By diagnostic appointment, we mean we're sitting down and establishing whether you are right for me too. Because at that point, we'll walk away. We need to manage the quoting and rating process. So our idea was to use our same system because we needed those workflows to work together. Not just going out and prospecting, but now we're going to market the account, and then we're going to write the account and start servicing it. We wanted everything to be united, integrated very strongly. And then we need to go through the proposal. Because are all proposals successful? Who has a 100% close ratio? Nobody. That's right. So what do you do with the 7 or 8 that you don't write? Or if you're lucky, the 5 or 6 that you don't write? What do most people do with them? In personal lines, agencies and brokerages, they go away. It's like I hurry and get a rate, and I present it, I didn't make it, I go on to the next one. The majority, that's the way they're working now. But you have opportunities. Those 7 or 8 or 6 or whatever the number might be for your close ratio, those ones that you don't write are great opportunities to remarket. What we found out is our close ratio on the second time around, the second game, is 50%. Because we don't have as much competition. When it started out, we had 4 or 5 brokers that we're working with, and now it's just us and their incumbent. Better chance of closing. Worth coming back and remarketing. Because we spent a lot of time there that we didn't get paid for, so let's at least take a little bit of opportunity. The best way for us to do it is automate it. Automate that contact. So these are all the different phases of the pipeline that we wanted to make sure we had automated so that each one tracked its own activity so we could measure success rates at different levels. That was important to us to make the science of this work. And then the last piece we want to really put together here is business intelligence. Because we talked about working smarter, and so we wanted to know more about what we knew about our prospects. We wanted to be able to aggregate that information out. So one was data integrity. If what we entered in, if nobody trusted it, then we were on the wrong path. So the trust in our broker management system, the data we have, has to be up there. It has to be at the top. In fact, to us, it's the most valuable, the most accurate information. Anything else is wrong. So we spend time, when we have a service call with a client, we make sure that the CSR takes the opportunity to say, hey, can I just go through your contact information and make sure it's up to date? Has anything changed in your life? Those types of things that can help initiate and bring more information into the system. Analyzing our activity. Understanding how people have different habits, different personalities, so that our producers have more opportunity. They can increase those opportunities, those close ratios. The close ratios just don't double. You need to work on that. You need to build some good workflows, good habits in order to get there. We want to make sure we identify the next action. We want to understand those points. So the timing of our communication and what we heard back and when we initiated another conversation with them was really important. Because you want to understand when the person's ready to buy. How many times have you gone and bought something at a store and finally they're starting to market that information to you? We have a new store that opened in our city, a Meyer store, and they have M-Perks. And when you go out and buy, I just bought some water, and automatically I get all kinds of information about water and associated products, which is just about anything, right? My point is, when you buy something, they're tracking and doing that. How many times have you tracked when somebody bought something at your agency? When they buy a boat, do they have a cottage, a seasonal home? You know, different things that can trigger that we just sort of ignore at times. And the last piece here about taking this data is personalizing our message. What we started doing is we built what we call smart documents. And then whether we email those documents or we mail them out in traditional mail or however they get communicated, we want to be able to take all the data that's in our system and look at it and say, if it's this producer or this type of policy or from this company or this type of claim, whatever the situation was, we would have it craft a letter or a communication point with our client based off all that information. And so we were able to take a lot of different things in our office, not just the sales process, but the servicing side, and streamline their work so they also work smart. So when it's time to schedule an appointment, we understood the date of the appointment, the follow-up date, the follow-up on the appointment. When we had a claim situation, it was able to communicate the expectations to a client, what type of claim it was. You know, depending on who the CSR was or the producer, would put their personal contact information in the letter, all without anybody touching it. We have audits, you know, regular audits on commercial policies, and those are all done by just a transaction-based person. That's stratification, putting it down where somebody can just push buttons, and that document actually reviews the audit and asks a few questions of that person and communicates the whole communication around that audit. Was it estimated or waived or actual? Was it over 10%? Are we going to make a change on your policy? Everything that's going to go on there is done by somebody that doesn't even know about insurance. They just look at an audit and answer questions, and the communication prepares itself. And that's that last part that we feel we've gone over that curve and said, you know, we're going to work really smart. We're going to have technology really do the work that it was designed to do. It's going to look at our data, which we trust. It's very consistent. It's going to communicate, whether it be our sales message, our service message, or our brand message to our customers. With that, I just wanted to open up to a couple minutes of open discussion. I think my watch says 5 minutes. 3 minutes. Let's go 4. Negotiate. Anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts about this? Does it sound difficult? Is it something you can go back and manage? You know, my success is always about those people that do go back and actually implement what we talk about. Yes, sir.
How does the evaluation process work in real life conversation as to whether the fit is there or not?
Yeah, so the question was, how does the evaluation process work in real life? And whether it be personal lines or be it in the small commercial or even in large commercial, first one we make sure is we have expertise in the agency. We have a market for that type of business. You know, if we're going out and we see the current carrier as a standard preferred market, good pricing, and we're sitting there with markets that are just not really overly excited about that line of business, you know, we're best to walk away from that. You know, we're not going to compete very easily. Now, if they had a situation saying, hey, that company's non-renewing or they're no longer doing that business or something like that, those change the demographics. But in most cases, we're saying, you know, we're just not going to gamble on this. The gamble, the payback is too low. And so understanding where and what our expertise is and where our pricing is most competitive, and then streamlining. You know, even though we're representing multiple companies as an independent broker, we have to make sure that we're not necessarily having to go out to all of them. We have to understand where we're going to go. So we've selected for certain sizes and classes of business the only carriers we're going to go to. Now, there are those times when, say, gee, you know, we lost it to one of our own companies that we just didn't go to. But I can tell you the odds and statistics are for you by streamlining your workflow. You can't just quote every single company that's out there. And so we wanted to make sure we understood where our pricing was, what markets we're going to go to, how much revenue we're going to generate, make sure we don't spend any more than that. One quick thing, we identified our cost per hour in the agency, just like your accountant or attorney does. Ours came out to $198 an hour. And so when we see that revenue amount down there and it says $200, we basically have 1 hour. Not to work on quoting this risk, we have 1 hour to service it its entire term. You know, claims, policy changes, whatever you have. And that's how we have to identify. So we rate our prospects A, B, C, D. And some prospects are, in our discussion, we find out they're very high service. And if we can't put them to our portal where they can do a little bit of self-service, we might have to walk just because we're not going to make money on this account. We're going to know that before we even write it. And those are hardest things to do. When you can do that, though, you've hit the spot. You've hit the spot of knowing, understanding your business best. Yes, sir.
Do you use a specific tool for a dashboard, or you're using your BMS?
We were using our BMS. You know, is it a perfect world? No, there's no utilization. You know, and I think Wendy said it. We're not waiting for perfection. We want to get it utilized and out there. And we've always been at that, you know, that cutting edge of implementing what we have available for us. We do have a dashboard that tells us daily what's going on. We already had the activity. One thing we found is streamlining the activities was important. Our producers really only know about 15 activity codes. You know, from appointment to proposals to everything they work with on a client. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned the fact that if you have a system that you're working with and you see that the staff isn't either working with it or utilizing it, that maybe you need to reassess that system. Sometimes if you have like a staff and you see that there's a number of people that use the system and you have half the people that don't use the system, and you know that it works.
I might have made a miscomment there, because I would spend more time utilizing my staff than I would my technology.
What do you mean by
But in other words, you have people that aren't using it, you need to get them on board, or we perform what we call a termination process. Oh, I'm sorry, that was very rude. No, think of yourself as a team. You're coaching a team, and you've got all your players, you're trying to line up their best, and I always go to find out what everybody's best skill set is, and make sure to utilize that. I don't try to put somebody in an area that they're not comfortable with. I try to do that, but there's a point where, you know, I talked to a principal, and I'll just wrap this up real quick with this. I talked to a principal a couple weeks ago at a seminar, comes up to me and he says, I like what you're talking about, our staff does that, I don't. Because he says, I've been there for a long time, I have paper files, this is the way I work. And I said, you'd be the first one I'd let go. I mean, really, you need consistency throughout the process, the business process. And if you have staff that are, you know, some get it and some don't, you either work really hard to educate them up to that level, or you need to replace the team. And that's a hard thing. Don't call me for human resource issues, but that definitely is a hard task to take on. But any company will do it. Anything else? I'm going to be here at the break. We're taking a break right now.
We are. There was one question over here.
Okay. Sorry, there's a poll there.
How long is, for Tom, Michigan, how long have you been running this process?
In 2008, we started
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, the question was how long we've been doing this. And in 2008, we started our automated pipeline tool. But it was really a little crude at that point. It now, you know, it constantly gets enhanced. I just ran through enhancements this past weekend. People always say, well, you just build it and forget about it. And we say, no, we build it and we maintain it every month. If a producer comes up where they had a certain sales issue or sales situation that was unique, we go back in their workflows and make sure to compensate for it. Our last few efforts as far as taking risks and the cards have been just the last 2 years. That's where we've seen a big elevation in our close ratios. Okay, we're on break, right?